Record is on. We usually, unfortunately, have people late, but I don't want to start. I mean, I don't want to start late. If they're late, they're late. We've got enough people here. Okay, it's 7. I'm letting them in now.
Okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to 1 Million Miles, My Peace Corps Journey by Jody Olsen. The program tonight is sponsored by the Maryland Women's Heritage Center and moderated by our board member, Kate Campbell Stevenson. I'm Kathy Santora, and I'm president of the board of directors. The Maryland Women's Heritage Center is the only organization in the state and one of the few in the country completely devoted to telling and preserving women's stories. Our event venue is located in downtown Baltimore in the historic Women's Industrial Exchange building, but our programs and events shine a light on women, past and present, all over the state. Telling stories about women of accomplishment like the ones you'll hear tonight is one of our favorite things. To learn more about how you can help us do this work, please visit our website, contact me, Kathy Santora, or our executive director, Diana Bailey. In everything that we do, we add her story to history to tell our story. Jody, we look forward to hearing about your long Peace Corps career, and I'm turning this over now to both Jody as well as Kate. Thank you, and thank you for being here.
Good evening. I am thrilled to have Dr. Jody Olsen with us this evening to share some of her amazing stories. Some will be from the Peace Corps experiences, and others will be stories about women's leadership that she's encountered throughout her various careers. She started as Jody Olsen started as a Peace Corps volunteer in Tunisia in 1966 and 1968. And I must confess, I forgot to look up exactly where Tunisia is, but maybe we can get an idea from Jody. And she served in 5 other senior positions with the Peace Corps, including deputy director, before she became the director of the Peace Corps in 2018 to 2021. And she has several stories that she will be able to share with you. Actually, I've heard Jody speak 3 times. Each time it's been a little different, but I did put a request in for 2 stories, and then she can decide whatever else she'd like to share. Jody was a visiting professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and the director of the Center for Global Education. In the 90s, she was a director for the organization that manages the Fulbright Senior Scholars Program. So she's had quite a few different kinds of leadership positions, and she's received many awards, including the University of Maryland College Park President's Award, the Utah Alumni of the Year Award, and several honorary doctorates. And she's associated with, she's been a residence fellow at the IOP Harvard Kennedy School. Now, I wish I knew what IOP it means, and I forgot to ask you about that earlier, Jody, so you can share with us on that too. But please, I want to encourage everybody on this call to write down your questions that you may have in the chat, because Diana Bailey will be our executive director, will be monitoring those questions, and she'll shout them out or insert them when it's most appropriate. But we really want it to be a friendly, relaxed in evening of enjoying the stories from Dr. Jody Olsen. And with that, without further ado, please join us, Jody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. And I'm, it's a little nerve-wracking a bit that, Kate, you've already heard these stories, but
no, that's why I wanted you to come.
Got it. It's good. As you notice, I'm a little bit informal, which is good. So as you have questions or things come up, please don't worry about me in any way because I really love telling stories. And so I really appreciate the whole purpose of the Maryland Women Heritage Society, and it's about telling women's stories, and with that, women's leadership stories. Tunisia is in North Africa. It's a little sliver stuck between Algeria and Libya. And so the whole time I was there, I was wondering whether Libya was going to invade or Algeria was going to invade, because we were just a little teeny piece there. So that is North Africa. The IOP is the Institute of Politics in the Kennedy School. And so during that semester, 2 years ago, it was me talking some about politics, although Peace Corps is not about politics. So I tried to maneuver around that as best I could as I taught there. But what I would like to do this evening is to give just a couple of moments of my own leadership journey, and then talk about women and leadership through three specific stories. And so first, I was a junior at the University of Utah, and I was engaged to be married, and we were going to stay in Utah and have a bunch of kids and do all those things that you do when you're from Salt Lake City, Utah, and you stay in Salt Lake City, Utah. And partway through the sorority dinner, a man who looked a little scruffy got up and he talked about his 2 years in Niger, West Africa. I put my fork down and I went, oh my heavens, this is 1964. I want to do that. I didn't know what that meant. So I had to break the news to my fiance the next day. And luckily for him, he said, oh, okay. And so 2 years later, we became Peace Corps volunteers. I mentioned that because the 2 years in Tunisia taught me the core of, I believe, who I am as a leader. And that women in particular with leadership, it should be everyone, but I'm speaking particularly about women. We're leaders because of our beauty of communities and who we are for each other in communities, and how we give to each other to support our leadership work. What I learned as a Peace Corps volunteer was building trust, because I went with no language, no understanding of the religion, no understanding of Arab society. And I was teaching 14-year-old boys in a lycée English, knowing nothing about what I was supposed to be doing. Well, I knew a little bit, but not a lot. And so I had to trust women who were fully covered, men who wore long white robes. Behind the covers and the white robes, a language that I didn't understand. But to become part of that 2-year experience, I had to reach out and I had to make mistakes, and it was okay to make mistakes. And through that, I built a family, a Tunisian family, and made friends that stayed with me for decades subsequent to that. I learned to hear different perspectives. I spent time with women because I was working with family planning, and I was working secondarily in a birth clinic. And we talked about women, their lives with no choices, choosing someone else, choose who they marry, being veiled a lot of the time, cooking the same food every day. What were their strengths? How could I believe in them as they believed in me? And we talked about wearing veils and not wearing veils, and what did it mean to the women? And hearing it, not judging it, hearing it and understanding why that was so important to who they are. As I say, part of it is being vulnerable and being willing to change. I learned to eat food I never dreamed I would eat. I learned a lot about how to interact with men, interact with women when men and women don't interact with each other, unless they're in their home and they're part of the same family. And I learned to respect men and women, boys and girls, children, grandparents, as equal partners with whomever I was trying to do what I wanted to do. And that was the gift that I think has led me on my leadership journey. And I think it is what women are good with for each other, because in order to build trust, in order to have perspectives, in order to partnership, in order to be willing to change, we have to be part of a community, a successful community across whatever we agree on and across whatever we disagree on, to find the common moments, the common places of agreement. I never converted, but that didn't mean that I didn't have full respect, and as best I could in 2 years, a wonderful understanding of a religion that drove so many people in a community that I cared about. That was a real gift, in part, to understand that, because my own religion at the time, being conservative Mormon, was very different than what I was experiencing. And how could we respect each other face to face, meal by meal, conversation by conversation? I'm going to now go to, as a leader, we're now moving many decades forward, and I'm going to go to about 15 years ago when I was Peace Corps Deputy Director. And I was I was acting as director, going to Thailand, where Thailand was celebrating the 45th anniversary of Peace Corps. And to do that, we were swearing in 80 new Peace Corps volunteers. And for the very first time in 45 years, the Princess of Thailand was coming. And she was going to be part of the ceremony. Now, Thailand has great awe, probably a little less so right now, but 15 years ago, for the kingdom. It's the Kingdom of Thailand, and for the royalty, to the point that it has its own language, the royalty, and its own TV station where it plays what royalty does every day, all day. And there's special protocols that have to be followed when you are with royalty. Well, what I appreciated is that as I went to the Peace Corps office the day before the event with the princess, that the Thai staff were so nervous that I was going to be okay and not insult them and make them nervous, because here, this event I was going to be at was going to be on TV throughout the country. And I went, okay, I'm going to do my best. I am going to honor your traditions. So I went to the embassy that afternoon to learn the traditions. And of course, I had packed a nice little black dress because I didn't want to stand out. And I knew it was going to be 100 degrees, so I had on my black sandals. And so they were teaching me the protocol. And as I walked out the door, she said, well, what are you going to wear? And I said, I have this nice little black dress. And she went, you only wear that to a funeral. You've got to find another dress by tomorrow. And then she said, and how about your shoes? And I said, well, here I am in these little black sandals. And she said, you never show your toes to the royalty. So I went, okay, here we go. So that night I went to the store and I discovered that almost nobody in Thailand wears size 8 closed-toed shoes. So I ended up buying a pair of shoes that had heels 3.5 inches high. I'm already 5'9", and it was going to be, And I went to a dressmaker and told the dressmaker what I needed in 24 hours and less. And they got all excited because it meant that their dress was going to be on national television. And they did this fabulous dress. Okay, here we go. We're now at the event. And no one's head can be higher than the royalty. And the princess is not very tall. And so all of her folks who take care of her usually scoot around on their knees.
Oh, gosh.
And I was told in no uncertain terms, don't stand higher than the princess. Okay, so she comes in and she goes up the stairs because she's on a dais. And I'm going to give her a gift. Now, first, I gave a speech to welcome the new volunteers. And you're supposed to never turn your back to the princess or to royalty. But the volunteers were on a different side. So I remember trying to do this and this so that I was always looking at the princess, but also looking at the volunteers because I was giving the speech. And I was very happy when I could sit down. All right, now I'm going to give her the gift. I'm on the front row, and there is the ambassador, the American ambassador, and the Minister of Education is on the other side. And the Peace Corps volunteer actually gave his speech to the princess in royal Thai. And everybody in the audience went, oh my heavens, he learned royal Thai, which is difficult because it's a tonal language. All right, so here I go. Two people scooted to me in their on their knees, and they handed me this gift. And the gift was on a little stand, and the little stand had fabric because I couldn't touch anything that the princess touched. So they scooted to me on their knees, they handed it to me, and I stood up, and I'm going to walk up 6 stairs in 3-inch hills, which made me 9, 10, 11. That made me, let's say, hitting 6 feet. And she's sitting in a chair. So I go up step by step. And with each step, I go lower and lower and lower and lower to where I am almost on my own knees. And I hand her the gift like this because my head can't be higher than hers. And I do all of that. And she gratefully accepts the gift. She smiles. And now I have to get back down, but I can't turn my back. So on these wobbly heels, I'm walking backwards down these stairs on national television with the royalty. And I do get to the bottom step. And I said, thank goodness. And I didn't even go back to my chair because I was afraid I was going to fall down. But I thought, okay, I think I did it. I think I did it. And so the ambassador turned to me and he said, you did a very good job. You followed protocol beautifully. I went, oh, thank you. All right, well, after that event, we were having high tea with the princess in one of the rooms of the hotel. And by luck, I was going to be sitting next to the princess. So we were all seated, and then the princess comes in, and the people on their knees are bringing her to sit. And of course, you can't sip any tea and you can't take any little cakes until the princess does. And she seemed to be in no hurry. But she came and she sat down, so elegant, so perfect as a princess. And she turned to me and she said, thank goodness that's over with. I now feel I can relax. And I go, oh my heavens. She said, this morning I just got off a plane from Egypt because I have my my particular malaria program that I'm learning and doing. And so I'm actually quite tired, and it's just really nice to sit here. Her English was flawless. And she and I spent 30 minutes having the most fun chatting about being women and the things that we do in our off hours. The fascinating takeaway for me, it has stayed so strong in my mind because she's a leader. I mean, she's a princess. And every step, every word, every expression is being watched and monitored all over the country. And she knows what she has to be as a leader to do that, to honor the heritage that she has and the heritage of the country. And so we know what we have to do. We know the traditions. I knew I had to respect traditions. That Peace Corps' long-term success was in honoring, as I say, honoring the Thai tuition traditions. But then when you go to the back room, the excitement of knowing you're women and you're women that have to do all those normal things. And sometimes it gets tiring, but you try not to let very many people know that it gets tiring. And I just learned so much from her about, I mean, whatever I thought about wearing heels and special dresses, she has to do that all day, every day. And it's hard. She said, it's really hard to be a princess. My second story, it goes back to March of 2020, which was only 4.5 years ago, when I was Peace Corps director. And at that time, as you all know, take your own heads back to March of 2020. It's when COVID became what COVID really became. And so go back 3 months before, and it was beginning in China. At the time, as director, we had 61 countries. With Peace Corps volunteers, we had 7,000 Peace Corps volunteers in rural villages in 61 countries, all over the world, all regions of the world, all continents of the world except Antarctica. And so this is who we were. It began in China, and we were trying to figure out what to do. Again, as you all know, you don't know what you do. And so it was a holiday. It was the end of December, and it was the holiday season in China. I forget what they call it, but it's that particular holiday. And we suddenly realized that the volunteers could not go back to their sites. So we brought them to Bangkok. And I remember at night, 8 p.m., I went on Zoom, and they were all in Bangkok, 8 a.m. the morning later, and having to say, you're going to have to come home. And I remember their faces. They who had given 6 months, a year and a half, almost 2 years, learned languages, bonded with students. And I was saying to them, you cannot go back to China. You're going to have to go home. I didn't realize that was just the beginning. Actually, I ran into one of the volunteers that had been in that chair a year later, and I said, did I ruin your life? And he went, no, it's okay. I remember. You look sad. We were sad. All right, now we fast forward to the Ides of March of 2020. And we had been hearing, this is Washington, we have 900 staff in Washington, D.C. And then we have about 2,500 staff in the 61 countries. And as I said, 7,000 Peace Corps volunteers. And with that, word was happening that countries were closing their borders. Mongolia closed its border in early February because it didn't want to get COVID. And so we had to bring volunteers home because we can't be in a country with a closed border and or airlines that can go in and out of the country. So they were closing down international flights and borders. And we were watching how this was beginning to happen and how we were trying to manage to be able to keep volunteers there. And on that afternoon of March 15th, I had just sent everybody home the previous Thursday, and I said, oh, probably 2 weeks, and then we can come back to the office. Well, actually, I never went back to the office until I cleaned out my desk when I left a year later. But so we didn't get this until I got that call in the afternoon. And the country directors had been calling the regional directors, and the regional directors had called the associate director, and he called me that afternoon. We were still practicing using our phones and, how do you have conference calls, because we were all used to being together. And he said, the recommendation is that we bring all the volunteers home now. And I had feared for the previous few days that that might happen, but didn't want to believe it. We all know that if we don't use the words, it doesn't happen. And he used the words. I had 30 seconds. Let's give it a minute to make a decision. And that decision was going to take a belief I had of 60 years, 250,000 Peace Corps volunteers, 142 countries, a lifetime of change for people in the countries and for Peace Corps volunteers. I had committed my soul to this program, to this agency of the US government. And now at that moment, I was about to put the words out of my mouth that said, bring everybody home. And I could think of Sarge Shriver. I could think of President Kennedy. I could think of Sarge Shriver. I could think of other previous Peace Corps directors. And I'm thinking, I'm letting everyone down. I'm letting this system down. I'm letting this belief down. I'm letting these countries down. But I only had a minute to think because the decision had to be made. So I said to Patrick, we'll bring everybody home. Organize a conference call for 8 o'clock tonight. I want the email ready to go by midnight tonight. It will go out to 10,000 people. And it will explain that everybody needs to come home now. And then I said, don't tell the White House. Peace Corps reports to the White House directly. Don't tell the White House. Don't tell Congress. Don't tell the State Department. We don't go through the State Department, but they're our friends. Don't tell anyone until the memo goes out. Because I said, I don't want us to be second guessed. Because time is of essence. Time is about hours, not days. And, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand. Sorry about that. So by midnight, the memo went out. And of course, all hell breaks loose. Because, just think of those volunteers that were sitting on the chair in Bangkok. You think of the volunteers in South Africa that were in class teaching their students, the volunteers in Cambodia working in health clinics, the volunteers in East Macedonia working with handicapped children. They're right in the middle of this work and they get this note, you have to go home now. That began an extraordinary process that was built on 60 years of trust between the volunteer and the 60 years of host families being willing to be vulnerable, volunteers being willing to be vulnerable, children being willing to be vulnerable, and looking at change and how change had to be made. And well, how change happens when you trust and your partners and your companions in that 2 years. And all of a sudden, the volunteer goes to her headmaster and says, I have to leave. I have to leave now, in the next day, in the next 2 days. What happened was extraordinary, which comes back to what I said of women. Leaders are about communities of trust. Host families made little extra meals for them as they got on the motor scooters and as they got in the taxis, as they got on the buses to go to the capital cities. Headmasters organized school a school event to say goodbye. The volunteers gave little gifts to those that they were working with. And by community after community in those next 1, 2, 3 days, they invented ceremonies for goodbye. And the community gave them their love in the form of transportation, in the form of food, in the form of little pieces of cloth, of little things that would hold them together when the volunteers left. They took public transportation to the capital city, maybe a day, 2 days, 3 days, 5 days to do this. There was a blizzard in Mongolia, and it's a 40 hours by train to get into the capital city. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Education, the Minister of Health, all called Peace Corps and said, we will do whatever we can for you because of all that you have been here for us, with us over all these years. In Ukraine, when it was our biggest program and 350 volunteers arrived at the airport, it had taken 4 special planes to get one to land, to pay to bring a plane. And then the electricity went out. And the staff at the airport in Kyiv personally wrote out all the departure, everything that had to be done to make sure those volunteers could leave successfully on the charter flight. We had hundreds, thousands of those stories all over the world that enabled us to bring 7,000 volunteers home in 9 days. Nobody got hurt, nobody got lost, and nobody got sick. I got a call from one of the regional bureau chiefs at State Department 4 days later, and he went, "How did you know? We can't get our staff out." And then I got calls from ambassadors going, "Can we get on your charter? Can we do this?" And I could say, "It's okay. Yes, we'll do what we can to be here for you." I go through that story because it is about leadership as a group. Leadership is trust. I had to believe in all the staff that they were going to do what they had to do to keep those volunteers healthy on the way home. That was so key, was my trust in everyone else and my belief that our partnership and our trainings had worked. Related story number 3, which began the moment that the email to 10,000 people went out. That was a bit of a surprise to me, a happy surprise. Congress. We didn't tell Congress, as I mentioned, before it happened. We knew within an hour or 2 of when that email would go out that it was going to not be a pretty picture because families in particular would call their email, text, whatever you do, their congressional staff immediately, "What the hell is going on? What is Peace Corps doing? How can Johnny come home, or Andre or whomever?" Because at that moment, COVID hadn't quite hit for the seriousness that it was. And so our decision coming a few days ahead, only a few days of others, it was a bit of a surprise. Well, we could have sort of the castle fall down on us if we didn't now manage communication, which is part of a decision process that's about partnership and trust. So, and it wasn't my idea, which is why it was good that we were a group, but someone said, we must do talking points. We must do them every 4 hours. They must go to the staff of every member of Congress. They must go to all the leadership at state. And of course, they must go to the White House and to OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. And so we started these every 4-hour talking points, saying, we would have to say, for example, that the 3rd plane we were trying to get Ukraine canceled. So we had to give the bad news, the temporary bad news, with the good news. That there were all the complications in Peru, as some of you might remember. We had to give those and how difficult it was to get planes to Peru. Anyway, so as we talked about this in the talking points, something wonderful happened. Congressional people serve their constituents. That's what they believe they're supposed to do. And so when the constituents call angry, they need to have answers. And so a mother calls and she says, I know that third charter flight was canceled to Kyiv. What's going on? This is awful. Johnny is crying. It's whatever. And so the staff person goes, oh my heavens, you know, an hour ago, I just got news that the fourth flight has just taken off. You're going to be okay. It should land in 6 hours. That the staff in the congressional offices could be the people who carried our message. They became our advocates with people who were not sure that they thought this was the right decision. And it not only were they our advocates, they called the families down. And then with that, 3 weeks later, when a special bill was passed for COVID, they gave us money for extra health. They gave us money for the volunteers coming home. They nobody breaks rules. They changed the law for a few rules so that our evacuees could get employment, non-competitive eligible employment, and that they could get unemployment, which volunteers don't normally get. And so that third story for me is, again, it's a community, and you find the spots as you try to build a leadership community where you have something in common. And we discovered what we had in common with Congress at that moment. And with that, we could build a relationship. So in those stories, it again comes back for me in my own sense of leadership, of being that volunteer who didn't know what she was doing and had to learn, and we learn it all our lives. I'm sure every one of you can think of the time that you had to be vulnerable, that you had to trust when you didn't know that you could trust, that you had to find that little space with someone that you weren't sure you were going to like, that you had something in common so you could make it work together and become good friends. It's a life journey for us individually as women, but particularly as a community. And why we're so important for each of our individual leader is dependent on our group being there for each other. The last part I want to mention, and it's ironic because I was just on a Zoom call before this Zoom call with undergraduates at the University of Utah. And to get ready because I'm going to go out there and give a talk. But I asked them, and I've been asking students in several different colleges, because 2 days ago I gave a talk at St. Olaf, where my grandson goes to school. And I asked those students, what's important for leadership and who we are now. And this is where all of us tonight, all of us in our family, play leadership roles, because critical for youth today that were locked down for 2 and 3 years, just when they were working on social skills, they are afraid, or more afraid, not totally afraid, but more afraid to have face-to-face conversations, to reach out, to try something they've never tried before, to get off their screens, to have a mentor. And as what 3 different students said to me, We don't have heroes. The older generations let us down. So why should we do something? Now, many of the students that I talked to said, that's what our friends are like. We're different. We're good. And as I have been particularly spending time with the St. Olaf students 2 days ago, they're doing well. But I asked them on the Zoom call an hour ago, and I asked them 2 days ago, what's important that we as older generations can give you now? One, and I heard it from 3 different people tonight on the of undergraduates, tell us your stories. We need your stories. We need to know that it can be okay. We need to know that you had bumps in the road. We need to know what you were like when you were us, our age. Tell us your stories. Be optimistic so that we know that we can go forward. Mentor. Have a young person that we even take by the hand, that we talk over lunch, over dinner, over coffee, over whatever young people drink. No, not some of what they drink. Anyway, but find a spot with them that's face to face and mentor and say, I'm here for you. Just ask questions. We're going to trust. You're going to see my vulnerabilities as a mentor. I'm also vulnerable. I screwed up. Be here with me. Show.
Would you like to take a breath? Would you like to take a breath or a drink of water? I have a couple
Okay.
comments in the chat.
Okay, I'm good. I'm almost done and I can just come right
Okay.
into it. I got about 3 minutes.
Oh,
Well, or
that's
something
fine.
like that.
Absolutely fine. It's whatever you need.
Okay, then I'll go right into it. Show us that we can be safe when we reach to the unknown. Take us with you when you go do something special. And introduce us to other leaders so they can give us their stories. And it is so important. And I think this is what I'm after and everything I'm trying to do is to encourage all of us to physically be present for young people and encourage them on the journey that we have taken and that we are still taking. Because they, as they say to me, they're feeling farther behind as they're going into the journey from where we were at their age. And I feel that we have a responsibility, particularly with the stories that we tell, one by one, person by person, as well as in groups. With that, I'm ready to go into whatever we all want to do.
Well, Jody, thank you. I didn't realize you were so close to your end, but I just wanted to provide you some feedback that was in the chat box. And Kaylin said she really liked your first story. So that comment was from a while back, but again, it was a great story. And then Danita, who's also on our board, I know you said there were 142 countries. What are a few of the countries that do not have Peace Corps volunteers?
Countries that,
Region or-
yeah, and as you saw, we were in 61 at the time, and over the 60 years, it's been 142. For example, but largely the countries we cannot be in are the countries that are chaotic and where safety and security is an issue. And very importantly, a country invites us. We don't say we're coming. They invite us. And that's the beginning of what a partnership is. So right at the moment, we've never been in Algeria. We had to leave Libya in 1969. We cannot be in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You get the picture of where we cannot be. We've had to leave most of the Middle East, which is really sad because I care particularly about the Middle East.
Thank you for that feedback. That kind of, we can see that how it flows, unfortunately. And Tracy made the comment, this is when to your point when you were bringing the volunteers out, she said you made the correct decision as a leader. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Diana, and thank you for the comment. I have gone on, I have met probably 250 to 300 of those 7,000 volunteers over these past 4 years. And I always go and I go, are we okay? Is it going to be all right? Are you all right? And they've given me their onward journey, which is in many cases has been quite extraordinary. And it really comes back in part to our point, the growth that they had having to go through that, landing in New York in most cases, or in LA, or in Miami, with no plans and no thought they were even going to be in the US. And what they have been able to do, and in part, in several cases, have stayed in touch with their communities back home this way, and have helped finish the classes so that the kids could complete the class in June. And so they were doing it online, which is a gift that we have today if we don't abuse it. And so they really feel that even from here and not being able to physically go back, that many of them have stayed in touch and stayed strong.
There's another comment from Tracy that she says that she was at EPA during that time and that they benefited greatly as we were able to hire many of those returning Peace Corps volunteers. They were wonderful colleagues to have on board at our agency. So they got picked up, which is wonderful.
Thank you for saying that, because we can thank Congress for allowing that non-competitive eligibility, and many of the returning volunteers were then hired by the other federal agencies. And thank you.
Lisa is enjoying your backdrop in your room, and she's curious about what those artifacts, what the story is of those artifacts on your wall.
They're all masks, except for the center, that centerpiece that you see. That's a storyboard from Papua New Guinea. And so as a storyboard, it's got a couple of boats and villages in it, but it's how they told the stories. The masks come from everywhere, primarily West Africa, and there's a few from Asia. And I didn't intend to create that wall. I collected them as I traveled. And about 15 years ago, they were kind of dusty. And so I took them out and put them on my wall, having no idea that for the past 4 years, they have been my anchor. And sorry, just to go into another very quick story, which again talks about leadership, if you don't mind, that we brought all these volunteers home by Zoom. I mean, they didn't fly by Zoom, but we'd had to do all our communication by Zoom. We couldn't even get together to do it. And so we had our senior staff meeting 3 days a week, 9:30 to 10:30, very precise. And about into month 3 of this, and people are just, they're all coming apart emotionally, even as we were holding ourselves together to make sure the volunteers were okay. But one of the staff people said to me, Jody, I know that every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30, you're going to be there. You're going to have on your earrings. You're going to have on your scarf. You're going to have on some kind of a pin. You're going to have on a little bit of makeup. Your hair is going to be good. And you've got those masks in the background. And those masks in the background, and you right here with a smile on your face, and we never ask you how you really feel, but with that smile on your face, you give us the courage to continue. And so I appreciate the masks kept me going, and I really appreciate those masks.
Good question, Lisa. Thanks for noticing that. Danita would like to know how an organization like ours, which is the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, could make a way to create this kind of mentoring spaces. Any thoughts about that?
What I'm going to do, yes, to do a piece of an answer is I am co-president of a little all-volunteer NGO called Women of Peace Corps Legacy. And one of the activities we do very specifically is mentor. And so those of us who have been around the Peace Corps block a while are mentoring the young people. In this case, it's returning Peace Corps volunteers. So they're usually, some volunteers are older, but most of the mentees are 25 to 30, let's say. And because mentoring gets complex and sometimes falls apart, a mentor program. So what we have set up is we do it once a year in March. And we have an equal number of mentors and mentees, and we put a flyer out. Well, we don't put a flyer out. You send emails out to people to invite people to be a mentor or a mentee. And we have about 30 mentees and 30 mentors each time. We begin by on Zoom bringing everybody together and talk about what it is to mentor. We have put together materials for both mentors and mentees. And as part of that, we go into small groups. And so you can, as a group, get to know each other. And the mentee-mentor requirement is at least 5 sessions over a 2 to 3 month period. Halfway through, we bring everybody together. How are you doing? How's it working? And then we have a closing ceremony where we talk about what happened as the mentor-mentee relationship works over that 3 month period. And so the mentor-mentees can do it however they want. But as I say, we set an expectation of at least 5 sessions over that time. So it makes it easier for people to say yes, because they know there's a beginning and a middle and an end to it. And 2, everybody has a little crib sheet, so to speak, to begin to open up as to who you are with each other. I've done it 3 times. I've done it every year. I'm still close friends with my mentees. In each case, I've mentored each for a year, but that was our choice after the 5. One of them is now my co-president. Another one I helped move from Peace Corps to working now for the Department of State, and we're now good friends. But the trick to a good mentor program, we found, is the structure. The structure of guidelines, the structure of number of times, a beginning, a middle, and an end point. And as I say, most of those who have participated in the program have stayed on, but for some, it's, I need this specific time, and then onward it goes. Our mentoring has been on whatever the mentees feel important. Largely, it's stories, because one of the things we all have in common is something to do with Peace Corps. But it is having to do with professional development, personal development, family. I mean, we're not counselors. Oh, heaven forbid, nobody's a counselor. But it's helping, and it comes right back to what I said about young people. It's parts of our lives that we take for granted, and we say, oh yeah, that's ordinary. What I've discovered is with young people, it's all new. They want to hear about it. They want to know about it. They want to ask questions about it. And that's what a structured mentoring program can be.
Thank you for your feedback. Anne has a question. Once volunteers were able to return to their countries, how many of them, in fact, were able to return to the Peace Corps in some form or place?
The sad part of that part of the sad story is that with all of our efforts, the first volunteers couldn't go back for over 2 years.
Mm.
And by then, almost everybody had moved on, because you can't wait around for 2 years. So it's been almost new volunteers. But I'll give you one quick story. As I said, I'm a storyteller. One of the volunteers that we had to bring home from Myanmar, when with this time, I ran into him 2 years later in Portland, Oregon. And, I'm going, oh, what's it been like? What have you been doing? And he's just beaming. And I'm thinking, oh, well, the 2-year experience must have been pretty good for you after you came back. And he said, next week I get on the airplane and I'm going to Vietnam for Vietnam 1, the first volunteers ever to Vietnam. And he said, this is perfect for me. So we have cases where the volunteers have gone back to different countries. I don't think there's more than maybe 10 or 20 that went back to their own country. We started an online program. It's very specific and it can only be for return volunteers, and it lasts for 10 weeks, but it's where you have your volunteer experience, but online. And you even have meals together as in addition to technical work back and forth. And that's also worked out very well.
Kate has told us that you have a new book. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
what was the instigation to write it?
Oh,
And where can we find it besides Amazon or if any place else? Oh,
okay,
show and
here it
tell.
is.
Wonderful.
Here's my book. Probably longer than anybody wants to read, but there it is. Okay, here's the book, and I'll give you just a little bit about what it's like to write a book. Anyway, I'd never written a book. I've probably written 5,000 government memos, and I've published some academic articles, and I'm suspecting that no one's read any of those things ever. But you write what you have to write. So here I am. I'm finishing being Peace Corps director. I'm 78 years old. That was 4 years ago. So now you know how old I am. Anyway, I wanted to tell my story. And I had never written for more general population. And I thought, I want to tell my story. Both the story of Peace Corps, because you only got just a little smidgen of it, but also my own growing up in Utah. And my mother left me when I was 3, and I had no contact for at least 20 years. And it too is a very complex personal story. And I felt compelled, it was a passion to write this stuff down. And so in beginning to write it down, I had a friend who had worked for a publishing company. She was retired, but she knew how to be a mentor, back to being a mentor, because she had mentored writers. And so she started talking to me about how this works and how do you write something that people will read. So you have to go back and learn the basics of how do you show and not tell. What is a point of view? What is, how do you write descriptions? How do you use 5 senses when you are writing something? And just a little tidbit. Ultimately, the University of Utah decided to publish it because of my own Utah background. But we were sitting at lunch, and my contact person, it was me, and then the head of the publishing office. He said, Jody, you must keep great journals because you have so much detail and so many conversations in your book. And I said, no, I never kept a journal. I never wrote things down. I mean, I have formal speeches, I have memos, I have those things, but I never kept a journal ever. And so he said, well, what did you do? I said, I made it up. I made up all those conversations. I said, I remember the tone of the meeting. I remember the tone of the event, but I made up the conversations. And at which point the head of the press office went, her face was like, but she said, okay, I think we're all right. Because I promised every detail that could be true to my mind is there. And I've had, another part is I've had 15 beta readers go through it, both from personal and from Peace Corps. because I wanted to be sure that, because I didn't keep journals, they had played some of the parts in the lives that I had had. And I wanted to make sure I was accurate. And that was a very, very helpful part. I also said, as they were reading, if there's a page you do not want to turn, mark it and tell me, because that page will go. You've got to want to turn the pages because there's a lot of them. And so I appreciate the question, because since the Heritage Foundation Center are about stories, we all can write these stories. We all can write this down. It's a challenge. It's hard. As people tell me, it's butt in the chair. And you can't edit a blank page. You just have to do it, but you can do it.
Well, Jody, a memoir is from your own point of view and your
Yes.
memory. And so, as opposed to a biography that
Right.
whatever. And
Yeah, Kate, that's a really important point. That, and I checked on what is the difference between a memoir and all that other stuff. I'm not a historian. I don't have the patience to be a historian. I don't have the patience to do a biography. And I didn't have the patience to do an autobiography, because then I had to go into the research and see what really happened. Well, I tried to see what really happened. But when it's a memoir, it's who you believe you are. It's what you believe happened. And the joy for me of writing a memoir and reading a memoir is you are more likely to get feelings. For it to be successful, I think, and hopefully I did it in mine, I have to be raw with myself. My best friend brother was killed in a car accident. What was the impact on me at that moment when I was young? What was the impact on our family? What was the impact on our family for the 50 subsequent years? There's a rawness that has to be written. So a memoir is scary because part of you that you're not quite sure you want to share, you have to share.
Mhm.
And the part about my mother leaving, I had two social workers reading it, and they said, Jody, you're not showing your anger. And I said, but I don't feel anger. Jody, you're not showing your anger. Well, I don't feel anger. Over and over. And then finally she said to me, okay, if you don't feel the anger, then you can't write the anger, but you have to tell your reader why you don't feel angry. What is it about you that made you, that you don't feel angry at this point in your life? And that again was a lesson. I had to, deep inside, I don't feel angry, but I had to tell the reader why I didn't feel angry. What was wrong? What was in that experience that was sadness, but not anger? So the advantage of picking up any memoir, I think if it's reasonably well written, is that person is saying, I'm going to give you these emotions. I'm going to give you what this journey is. And you see me who I am, but there was a lot that got there. And you can feel it because as I was learning, well, I'll give you one other piece. Sorry, I'm wandering on, so tell me to be quiet at any point. But I was sharing a couple of the chapters with different people, mostly because of Peace Corps. The number of people who said to me, and it was like 10, 12, 15 people that I had known for years, said, how did you know, Jody? I lost a mother at this age. I lost a father at this age. I lost a brother at this age. I have been carrying it all this time. You shared it. You're helping me. These are people I had no idea had had those experiences. I knew them in other walks of life. And so writing it and, oh, sorry about my hand, and sharing it outward I have been able to have conversations, and I have been able to see and be part of people in ways that I would have never dreamt possible. So yeah,
That's
I
great
recommend
growth.
it.
That's growth for everybody. You
Yeah,
know,
I
it's growth for the
recommend it
reader and
for,
growth for the writer. Yeah.
yeah, oh, I mean, growth for the writer. Oh, my heavens.
Mhm.
I can tell you
Absolutely.
every vulnerability I have, or at least most of them.
Mhm.
Jody, you were very discreet, but you did not mention where your book is available.
Oh, okay. It's available on Amazon, and it's available through the University of Utah, but just go to Amazon.
Okay.
It's really
Later at
funny
the
to
end, if you have time, if you could, we'll put it in the link in a minute. I
Yeah,
have
put
another
it in the link.
question
It's
from
just, yeah.
Kaylin or a comment. What did you learn in the Peace Corps that would help us to respect each other as Americans with diverse religions and opposing political views?
Okay, really, really good question. And I challenge myself with that question every day. Because as you can guess, I have a certain belief system. Anyway, what is important for me, and it comes in part from having a quick history that will come to this. My grandfather was a Democratic senator from Utah. My father was a Democratic congressman from Utah. And we have long, long Utah roots. After I came back from being a Peace Corps volunteer and went back into Peace Corps, I had a chance to get a senior position under Republican president. And my father and I went through a little ceremony where I switched parties in 1981 from Democrat to Republican. And I have served under 4 different Republican presidents, including Donald Trump. I served under 3 of them with great joy and pleasure. The 4th one you can read about in the book. But what I'm coming to is I learned through this process, my goal was to be a leader at Peace Corps. My goal was to give opportunities to thousands of Americans to have the experience I had. How did I have to be to allow that to happen in a Republican administration? What did I hear? What did I say? What did I listen to? What questions did I ask? How did I hear other people's stories, knowing that a lot of their core beliefs were very different from mine? So I come at it from saying that the beginning point is, what do you have in common? You all might be mothers. What is that in common? With my Tunisian family, the joke was, I didn't drink tea or coffee. They drank a lot of tea and coffee. They didn't eat pork, but I ate pork. And we had this wonderful togetherness about what we ate and what we didn't eat and why it was okay. So we have tiny smidgens of space that of something we have in common, and that's where we have to start. Maybe it's making sure the garbage cans are out on time and they're back in the garage on time. Well, that's, you can tell I'm worried about the garbage tomorrow. But what is it? That tiny space that you sit and you listen to a story, you tell a story, and then you tell the next story and listen to the next story, and you find that common moment where you can build the respect. It's hard.
It is
And it was
hard,
hard under the Trump administration. Oh my goodness.
but
Mm.
the great lesson right there to find the tiny spaces where we can connect.
Yep.
And whether it's older generations to younger generations or
Mhm.
different religions and so on, there will be those tiny spaces.
Mhm.
Well, I'm so happy that you we need to have you back because I want to hear about some of these interactions with the younger generation. And I know you're going to be doing this book tour all around the country. So, um, you
Oh,
know,
I'll have more stories. Anyone wants to hear more stories about young
yeah.
people?
When you come up with the young people and the questions that they were asking you, I haven't had any young people come up and say be optimistic or some of the other you were show us how we can find inspiring stories. I don't know. There's just a lot of questions that they asked you that I think were
Well, partly because I asked them. We have to take the lead. On the Zoom call before this one, so here were the students, and there were people who had given scholarships, and then they were the scholarship awardees. That's who we were. So we were just
okay.
back and forth. And so they opened it up about, well, does anyone have questions or comments or say a little bit about yourself? Well, I then turned to the students and I said, I have a question for you. I have two questions for you. And that's when I asked those questions. What would you like to hear?
Hmm.
What's important to you that someone like me can share and can be? It was so, it was like, wow. They were thinking, oh my heavens, what is it? And then they started talking and started thinking more on the Zoom call. And that's when they were saying the things that they were saying. But we have to take the leadership to ask the question and listen to the answer.
Ask them the questions
Ask
so they
them
can.
the question
Mm.
and listen to what they have to say. That's what I did at St. Olaf's.
Mhm.
These are
And
large, well, the students at St. Olaf, what do you need? What's important? What would you like to know that we can help you with as you finish school?
well, and
So
to
we
that point,
encourage.
Jody, Anne added to the similar point, stories are so important. Thank you for sharing your stories with us. Now we need to go forth and share ours with
Yes,
young people.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes. If there's any message that's a takeaway message, it's exactly what you said, Diana.
Yeah. Well, that message came from Anne, so that was her
Okay,
thoughts.
thank you.
Couple other comments, and I'll turn it back to Kate in a second.
Mhm.
This is from Angela, and she says many of her peers at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health were returning Peace Corps volunteers. They continue to be my favorite friends.
Oh, I
Such a
love,
legacy, right? And Danita appreciated the definition of memoir. And Angela has a question this time. What traits and characteristics exemplify successful Peace Corps volunteers?
patience,
Mhm.
sense of humor, partnerships, listening, being present, and letting yourself be absorbed. That's how it begins. From there, it is staying with something that's difficult,
Yeah.
listening to what other people need, because any change that's going to happen is going to be based on what they perceive they need, not what you perceive they need. And at another session, I can give you 100 examples of that. Success comes between the volunteer and the community is when the volunteer listens to what that community, that group of boys, that group of girls say they need, whether it's a basketball game after school, whether it's a climbing wall that kids asked for, whether it's, it goes on about hearing what people need. And that's what a successful volunteer does and is. And that's why I think return volunteers, in many cases, most cases, continue to give because of what they learned.
Lisa had another question. Back in the 60s, um, in although about she thought about applying for the Peace Corps, The application process was daunting and complex. Has it been streamlined over the last 50 years?
Yes, yes, it's now all online. You can choose your country. They try to make it as quick and as efficient as possible. There's a medical clearance, and that is usually where the complex part is. But if you're reasonably healthy and you can help sort those pieces out, then it's relatively quick. And you can choose a country, although I encourage people not to, because any country you go to turns out to be your favorite country.
Very good.
And I did put in the chat box Jody's book, 1 Million Miles, My Peace Corps Journey. So I'm sure you can click on that later tonight at Amazon or someplace else. And Danita added the comment, so starting off to listen for understanding, not rebuttal. Thank you, Danita.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other
As you turn it
questions?
to Kate, can I just do a little shout out to Jill? Hi, Jill.
Sure.
Jill, I see you're there. I just want to say I love you. You're great.
Longtime friends,
Hi,
yes.
sweetheart. I love you too.
Oh, I'm there for you.
For
I
those of
was
you that
so
don't
happy you're
know-
doing this with the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, which you know is so dear to my heart.
Since you were one of the founders.
Yes. Yeah, so for those of you that may not know, Jill Moss Greenberg lives in Florida now, but she was one of the co-founders and is still a member of our board as a founder, and she's still with us, even on Zoom, wherever we can find her. So
Yeah.
anyway, any other questions or comments you'd like to add to the chat box before I turn it back to Kate?
So
Kate, it's
I
all
just want to
yours.
say thank you so much for your wisdom and for your experience and sharing your stories with us. And we have so much to think about now about how we can apply some of those lessons to our own lives and going forward. We can apply it in our own organization here and in our individual lives to make a more peaceful world and more understanding. Thanks again, Jody, for being here with us. And we wish you a very successful tour. I know you're going to be
Thank you.
busy traveling a lot. So
Well, but thank you for inviting me. I'm honored. I'm honored with you all. Thank you. I'm proud of Maryland. I'm proud of our heritage.
yes, indeed. And we will make this video available to people if you want to have access to it. So with that, I saying a fond farewell to everyone. Thank you for attending, and my very best wishes for going into this holiday season.
Thank you. And Jody and Kate, if you'd stay on for a
Thank
couple
you.
minutes,
Good
please.
night.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Kate and Diana, for pulling this together. It's wonderful.
As well.
Wait,
Oops.
let me turn that off.
Yeah.